Do you know that there is a publishing company that wants to make life easier for you as a writer? This publishing company is called World Inkers Printing and Publishing. We publish in all different languages, and we're looking for writers of all genres, all formats. We're looking for scholars, ghostwriters, playwrights, poets, short fiction, novelists, you name it. We're looking for anybody who is interested in writing and the craft of writing to be in touch with us. You can reach us at info.worldinkers@gmail.com. With World Inkers Printing and Publishing, you do not require a lot of money to publish with us. Contact us today at info.worldinkers@gmail.com. Become a winner with other authors at World Inkers Printing and Publishing. Give us a shot. We will surely finish you. Hi, welcome to the Foreign Policy Review hosted by Parrot TV. I'm Dustin Pickering, your host, and our co-host CARLO PARCELLI is with us today. We have a couple of guests, Billy Bob, who we are familiar with from previous programming, and REGIS TREMBLAY, who is speaking out from the Crimea. So we're going to talk about Ukraine and Russia, and that's going to be an interesting topic from the ground here with REGIS, and we're going to have some opinions and thoughts. So let's everybody introduce ourselves. Let's start with REGIS since he's new to the program.
Well, thank you very much for having me. I'm an American citizen. I've been living in Yalta in the Crimea for 2 years now. It was 2 years ago at the beginning of March of this year. I'm a documentary filmmaker. I'm also I guess, podcaster or blogger. I do a video blog called Global Conversations on YouTube, BitChute and Rumble and elsewhere. I came to Russia in 2016 and also to Ukraine in Odessa to find out for myself what was really happening. And I was looking for the truth because I didn't believe the U.S. narrative. And since 2016, I've returned on 2 additional trips in 2018 and 2019, where I visited a number of Russian cities, St. Petersburg and Crimea on each of those trips. And then I finally decided I needed to relocate to Crimea in 2020. So I'm here because I'm trying to learn as much as I can about the truth and to counter the United States narrative about all things Russian, President Putin, and the Russian people.
Excellent. So are you working on a documentary currently, or are you just there for research? Or
No, I've done three documentaries. The first was The Ghost of Jeju. The second was 30 Seconds to Midnight. And the third documentary that I did was Who Are These Russians and Why Do We Hate Them? They're all available free on YouTube. And now what I do is I do 2 or 3 shows, 2 shows a day on my video podcast, which I call Global Conversations. Mm-hmm. And at the same time, I'm working with a tourist organization, and I'm making a lot of films about Crimea's very rich culture and history, literature, the arts, and the landscape. It's absolutely a beautiful place.
Excellent. So let's get a little bit of perspective from Billy Bob, and maybe just tell us, maybe some people are new to the show and we're just watching today. Just tell us a little bit about yourself.
So I'm just I'm American citizen, full-time employed, wife, 2 kids, and I have a real big interest in foreign policy, which makes your show great for me. You know, I think it's the mainstream Western narrative about what's going on is really, I think, it's not very accurate. It misrepresents. It purposely misrepresents reality in furtherance of the interests of the working class and things like that. So I don't. I don't know what else to say about myself, but
All right. I think
yeah.
we've got a good idea of your perspective and where you're coming from. Obviously, yeah. I think that this will be a great program. We'll get started here with. I'm just curious. So, what are the legitimate grievances that Russia has with the United States and NATO? I can ask. Whoever wants to answer that or whoever wants to put their 2 cents into that. That's something that's not really being accurately portrayed. I think is one of the main factors in this.
Well, I'm happy to comment on that. I think Russia has been concerned about its security for many, many years. We're not talking just economic security. We're talking about the survival of the country. And you can trace this, way, way back in history. And I know that you fellows know about this, but I'll begin with World War II. After Franklin Delano Roosevelt died, unfortunately, because he had befriended Stalin and they had worked out an arrangement. And then Harry Truman became president. He did not like Stalin. He didn't trust him. And he dropped the bombs on Hiroshima and Nagasaki, not to end the war because it was over. He dropped the bombs as a signal to Stalin that the United States was in charge. And you can fast forward a bit. You have the Cold War, and then you had the 1990s with the collapse of the Soviet Union. And Bush 1, George Herbert Walker Bush, was president then. He sent in his Harvard economic boys, his Chicago boys, and they basically raped and pillaged the what was left of the Russian economy, assets, money, created oligarchs that took billions and billions of dollars and took over industry in Russia. And in 2000, Vladimir Putin became president and all of that stopped. And since that time, there's been a target on Putin's back. He needed to be eliminated. They've tried several times. And you're probably familiar with the RAND report. They've had several reports, but it's their very stated policy. And they're the ones that write foreign policy. They're funded by the United States Army. Their stated foreign policy is to overextend Russia and to destabilize Russia, to bring about regime change, to get rid of Putin, and then to break up Russia and balkanize it into many small pieces. President Putin has been aware of this for all of this time. And in 2007, at the Munich Security Conference, he put the United States on notice that Russia was not going to get on its knees to the United States, that the United States and NATO had better not violate Russia's legitimate security concerns. And Bill Clinton was the first one to break the promise that NATO wouldn't move 1 inch closer to Russia after the fall of the Berlin Wall, when Germany was reunited. The Warsaw Pact fell apart. And in those years, since 1991, NATO, United States, which controls NATO, has moved all around Russia's borders. They've taken over the former Baltic republics. They're in Romania, they're in Moldova, and they're in Ukraine. And now Russia has finally said, no more. You have come too close. You are threatening us with missiles, tens of thousands of troops, war games, enormous war games with thousands of troops every year on our borders, gaming a first strike attack on us. And so this is where Russia is at. The way Russia looks at it is, we are in danger. Putin has said this very clearly, including Sergei Lavrov, their foreign minister. We are in danger of being destroyed. And so that's really where we are today. Russia had no choice but to act and to say no to the United States and NATO.
It's an excellent analysis. Do you think that a neutral Ukraine would help the situation if they had just backed off and let that pass instead of trying to push the agenda, the NATO agenda, onto the Ukrainians?
Absolutely. Absolutely. Russia has wanted a neutral Ukraine for a long time. The Russians do not consider Ukraine an enemy. And that's why they refuse to use the word war. They call it a special intervention. And these people are all Slavs. They've been one people for over 1,000 years. And if only, well, I should say it only, the United States was never going to let Ukraine declare its neutrality and has always wanted it to be part of Europe and to be part of NATO. Ukraine has had no say in any of this, probably for decades.
Wow. So does it, Carlo or Billy Bob, do you guys have anything to add to that?
Go ahead, Billy Bob.
No, I mean, I agree entirely with what Regis just said. I would like to ask Regis, what his thoughts are on why now the U.S. decided to do these things that really crossed red lines that the U.S. is fully aware about. So, there's a lot of analysts, working for the U.S. government have long said that if the U.S. tries to push, NATO onto Ukraine, that'll be a red line, and Russia would respond militarily. So why do you think they pushed as far as they did just now? Like, what's going on in the world that would give them the impetus to go ahead and do that now?
Well,
do you have any thoughts on that? I'm curious.
Yeah, no, I certainly do. And I have described this situation, this conflict in Ukraine in basically three ways. One, it certainly looks like a civil war between Western Ukraine and Eastern Ukraine since the coup in 2014. The second part of this is it's obviously a war between Russia or United States and Russia, undeclared, but in fact is. And Ukraine is merely the playing field. It's the chessboard. The third way to look at this, and this is what I think most people are not aware of, is if you look at this geopolitically, you have the United States creating chaos, destruction, not only in the Middle East, but now trying to create the same thing in this part of the European continent. Now, I want you to think about this. The great European landmass, the Eurasian landmass, stretches from the Far East and China. It's one landmass that goes all the way to Portugal. This part of the European peninsula is very important to the Chinese plan for a united Eurasia, a greater Eurasia, the one bridge, one road project that they've been working on to connect east to west as a economic and political and military entity. Now, what this means for the United States is the end of its dominance, the end of its control, the end of the petrodollar, and really the end of the empire. And the United States simply cannot let that happen, that China and Russia and India and Pakistan, the BRIC nations, and 20 or 30 other nations who have all bought into this one bridge, one road, new Eurasian project, America cannot let this happen. And I think what America is hoping to do is to prolong this conflict in Ukraine, and it'll probably spread to this surrounding area as long as they can to prevent the success and the completion of this one bridge, one road, new Eurasian project.
You think they were hoping to get Russia to invade like they did? Was that what they wanted?
Billy Bob, I have the feeling that they didn't think that Russia would invade. I think they were hoping to get Russia to get on its knees and obey the United States. Now, you have to keep in mind, simultaneously, the United States is doing the same type of involvement in the East China Sea with Taiwan, threatening China militarily, threatening China economically with trade, with sanctions.
Yeah.
And so you go, well, what is really happening here geopolitically? And I think the United States, using its influence with other countries, with NATO and Japan and South Korea, are trying to intimidate simultaneously Russia and China to bring them in and under American hegemony. I don't think that's going to happen. But Billy Bob, in answer to your question, no, my own personal opinion, I do not think that the United States, and I'm not going to even talk about NATO because NATO is controlled by the United States. The United States, I don't believe, ever thought that Russia would act and would enter the Ukraine to do two things. And this is important for people to understand. Russia is not looking to occupy Ukraine. Russia has clearly stated, President Putin, several times, we're going to go in to demilitarize Ukraine. In other words, to make their military incapable of continuing to kill people, 14,000 people in the Donbass region since 2014, which is not only a threat to the Donbass, it's a threat to Russia. There's 40 or 50,000 Ukrainian troops and Nazi battalions on the front of the Donbass between Lugansk and Donetsk. Anybody with common sense has got to realize that this is an enormous threat to Russia, enormous threat to Russia. And so what I think the United States miscalculated is they didn't think that Russia would go in there. And the second point for Russia going in was to denazify the country. And yes, the Ukraine has been under the control of neo-Nazis for a very long time. Their government, there's neo-Nazi parties in the government which control it, which intimidate people. And there are these armed forces, battalions, Azov battalion, right-wing gangs that intimidate the entire population. And so Russia, in order to ensure its own security, has to demilitarize the Ukrainian army and to denazify the country. That means to clean it out. And what it also means is a new government will be installed, and it will, the new government will create a new constitution that will clearly say that Ukraine will be a neutral country and will never enter Europe or NATO. That's all that Russia has ever wanted. And Russia wants to leave Ukraine in one piece as much as possible. They didn't do a shock and awe. They could have done a shock and awe like the United States did, but they haven't done that. They could have, but they wanted to avoid mass killing, and I'm saying mass killing, of millions of civilians. And so that's why this operation has taken place, and it's also why it has taken so long.
Right. So why the attacks and the seizing of the nuclear power plants in Ukraine? What is the objective there?
Trying to protect those nuclear power plants. I mean, it's these neo-Nazis who are disconnected, unconnected from any command coming from Kiev and the Ukrainian army and national forces. They are looking to create chaos and to kill as many people as they can. What they tried to do is to attack that one nuclear power plant, and it was just a sabotage attempt, and all of those saboteurs were eliminated very quickly by the Russians. But it's not in Russians' interest to go attacking nuclear power plants. It's right on their border, and there's supposed to be some dozen or so nuclear power plants there. They remember what happened at Chernobyl. You know, that radiation cloud has now gone all over the world. Why would Russia possibly want to attack infrastructure, especially nuclear, in Ukraine? It just doesn't make sense.
And that would bring us to the biochemical plants too, and this notion of a false flag. When it's not in Russia's interest to create a false flag, it's only in the interest of the neo-Nazis or the Nazis and their U.S. handlers who our friend Doug Valentine has accurately pointed out, have been under CIA auspices for 70 years.
Yeah.
So, that aspect of it. I'd just like to add one other thing to the one other element. Pepe Escobar talks about the real destabilization here is the ultimate loss of U.S. power and centrality, and how it's manifested itself in different ways. The Saudis and the UAE refuse to increase their oil. The United States has to go hat in hand to Venezuela, which gives me such great joy, and it's something that maybe will allow me to sleep a couple of hours. But to see them go on bended knee to ask Venezuela to send them more oil. That's it. Soon there will be elections in Brazil, and Lula will again be president of Brazil. There's signs all over the world that this domination of the U.S. is coming to an end. And if you were to believe Pepe, it's a kind of a last. This thing in Ukraine is not the last gasp, but it's one of the. It's a big step toward that final breakup where we can all breathe again in this world. So, I'm like, how do you think? You see it as that open and that extreme, or?
Yeah, I absolutely agree. I think the empire is on its last leg, its last few dying gasps. Which you just look around the world at what's happening. It's not only that United States needs Russian gas. I read somewhere it's between 17 and 28 billion barrels of gas a day that the United States imports. And now they're on their knees to Venezuela. They went to the Arabs, to Saudis, and said, please, you got to help us out. And the Saudis don't want anything to do with it. Not only that, but this is what I find. This will help you sleep, Carlo. I think you already know it. India, Pakistan, China, and other countries have said, we're not going to use the U.S. dollar anymore. We're going to trade in our own currencies. The yuan, the ruble, whatever it is in India, I can't remember right offhand.
Rupee. Yeah.
The rupees, yeah. And there's other countries that are going to do the same thing. You're going to see, I think the Southern Hemisphere is going to completely fall in line with Russia, China, India, Pakistan, and the rest of the world that want to be free of these 500 years of U.S. colonialism. But then you have to go back, and it was all that European colonialism for hundreds of years. And I think the world now wants to be free of that. They want a multipolar world where everybody is treated as an equal, strict adherence to international law, strict adherence to the principles of the United Nations Charter, and the respect and sovereignty of every single country, no matter how large or how small. It's a wonderful vision, and it's a vision that anybody with a clear head and an objective mind would say, this makes much more sense than the killing and the slaughtering that's been going on at the hands of the United States since the first white colonial settlers came here.
And the project for the new American century and their destabilization program. But you're right, and the notion of there's two notions about a number of notions why Iraq was invaded, and of course the most prominent one is oil. But the other one was Iraq was planning on going off the dollar like Iran had done, and
the same thing in Libya. The same thing in Libya.
Exactly. So I agree. I hope you and Pepe are 100% right and correct.
Well, I want to talk about a couple of other things, but
sure.
In my film 30 Seconds to Midnight, which I completed in 2016 after visiting Russia, because I had to come here to find out for myself the truth. I had posed in that film there were only two existential, realistic threats to life on the planet. The first is nuclear war, and I had Dr. Helen Caldicott in that film in a preeminent role, talking about the very imminent possibility, either by mistake, miscalculation, or by design. And the second was climate change. And I said at the end of the film, and you talked about the New American Century, the neocon, that's their document, their proclamation. I said at the end of the film, will the neocons in Washington, realizing they have lost this epic battle for control of the planet, take the whole world down with them in a nuclear Armageddon? And I can't believe any sane person on either side of any country that has these missiles, these nuclear weapons, any sane person would ever use them, because it would mean the elimination of life on the planet. But then you have to wonder, are these people who are calling the shots, wherever they are, in Washington or UK or wherever, are they sane or are they something else? And I have felt for a long time, and I'm not a religious person, but this looks to me like this primordial battle in the universe, good versus evil. I do think that what is behind this has no other way you can describe it other than evil.
Well, and from a religious perspective, there is of course the evangelical notion of the of Armageddon and a final battle in Israel, and they're just working toward that. All of these things are stepping stones toward the final annihilation of the planet. But that's kind of a religious science fiction. So it's a kind of positive. You know, they tolerate Israel and they tolerate Jews because that's a stepping stone toward the end of the world and the rapture and all of this nonsense. So if what you're saying, policymakers in DC are actually kind of absorbing by osmosis that kind of apocalypse, then you could be onto something. I will say, living in DC all of my life, these people are really evil. They're evil, and they're not like us. My bookstore was on Connecticut Avenue in Upper Northwest, where they live, where some of the wealthier people live. Of course, there's Northern Virginia, and those suburbs. And as I was pointing out to Billy Bob, of the 11, there's 3,400 counties in the United States, and 8 of the 11 richest counties in the United States are all around Washington, D.C. It's the military-industrial complex. So I know these people intimately, having had them as customers and in some cases adversaries. They're evil. They're evil people, and I would not put it past them to see a kind of a birthright to create the ultimate hell on earth. They're people don't understand how just demonic these people can be. I don't want to ramble on about it.
Carlo, I agree. I think they definitely pursue their interests without any moral restraints whatsoever. They're totally unrestrained. Whatever will serve their interests is what they're going to do. So I'm here in the Starbucks. There's quite a few distractions, but so I'm optimistic. I think I don't think they're suicidal, right? I think they have they have no interest in just destroying everything, doing the what was it, the Israel has the Samson option, they say. I don't think that's a realistic threat. I think they're going to be they're going to settle for what they can get, and I think it's inevitable that they're not going to be able to maintain their hegemony like they've been doing. But how that plays out, I'm not certain. I appreciate your guys' optimism. I'm glad you guys are very optimistic. It makes me feel better. I am a little bit wary about, what can happen. I mean, the U.S. is very powerful. They've got very powerful allies, and, they've got allies in all of the, all the countries. You have members of the capitalist class that are interested in seeing the U.S. succeed and keeping, China and Russia from succeeding. But what about you, Regis? So yeah, I always bring it back to class. You guys were getting towards religion. I like to bring it back to class. I mean, that's kind of that's where I come from. That's my analysis is more on the class based, and I see it as it's the imperialist versus the anti-imperialist bloc, and I think the imperialist is definitely giving way to the anti-imperialist bloc, and that's a tremendous thing for humanity.
Well, let's try to bring it back to Ukraine, I think.
Sure.
Well, I don't think it's totally unrelated, and I wouldn't put it on a religious level. I do agree with you. I think this is a class issue, and they've used all these other issues to divide us so that we don't realize who we're really up against, and it's these very small percentage of very wealthy global elite that we're up against. I'd like to talk about a couple of other things in terms of Ukraine, if you guys don't mind.
Yeah.
Please.
One thing that I've been asked, because I'm living here, is what's the mood and the sentiment in Russia? And I'm going to talk about three things, really. There are protests in Russia, just like there are protests in the United States and have been, and I've been part of them for a long time, against war. There are people here in Russia who do not want war. The second thing I'm going to say is that because of the Soviet Union, there has been intermarriage between all of the former Soviet countries, but especially between their brothers and sisters, which they consider Ukrainian. I have friends here who have family in Ukraine, and they're terribly worried about them, but they've taken sides. There are those who are pro-Russian and those who are pro-Ukraine. They no longer speak to each other. They no longer respond to telephone calls or emails. So there's this terrible thing that's happening that's dividing people over this intervention in Ukraine. I would like to say this because I have so many friends and former classmates and family who keep telling me, Regis, be safe. One of them has continually said, get your butt out of Dodge. Like this, there's going to be some danger here. There is no danger, military danger, assault, or anything like that to the Russian mainland or Crimea. It is not going to happen. The Russian forces are so overwhelming, and they have things really under control that it's not going to happen. I would say this. The mood in Russia is very calm. The one thing that has recently, because of these new sanctions, caused a great deal of stress have been the new sanctions, which have had an immediate effect on the cost of food, gas, goods, and everything. It's up about 20%. We went to the market yesterday, and things that we paid, 200 rubles for now, yesterday were 350 or 400 rubles. I mean, that's almost double here. And so this is really the mood here. But what people tell me here, especially the older ones who lived through the Soviet era and had grandparents who lived through the Great Patriotic War, World War II, they say we are tough and strong people. We survived that. We survived the 90s, and we will survive this. And so I just wanted to make that clear because so many people have been misled about Russia and the Russian people and what's really going on here. The final thing that I want to emphasize, President Putin's approval rating for the intervention into Ukraine has risen to above 70%. That doesn't mean 30% is against him, because as we know in all of these polls, many people just don't take a position. They say they don't know or whatever. But those who are opposed, I have to tell you, are the minority. And I don't know hardly anybody here in Yalta who is claiming that Putin is wrong. He should have never done this. So I just wanted to get that on the table. I don't know if you have any questions about that or what's happening in Russia, but I wanted to make that really clear.
Well, I'm glad you brought that up because that was my first question for you. So you answered it for me, and that should bring us to public opinion here, Billy Bob. What are your views on public opinion here?
You know, the U.S. Citizenry is just up against a propaganda apparatus that is just impossible to overstate. It's tragic. It's awful, but I mean, they're so good at confusing people, misleading people, dividing people, disenfranchising people, and again, that benefits, you know, the ruling class, the capitalist elite that, you know, own the media and own that apparatus and use it for their benefit. But it's such a tragic. I mean, we can't talk enough about how unfortunate it is that people aren't, you know, they're so misled, basically.
Yeah,
Right. I've been
that?
talking about we're in an information war, and this information war is just as violent as the actual war on the ground. Because as you've said, Billy Bob, it's turned people against each other. They've manufactured consent, as Noam Chomsky said in his book. They've manufactured this because of the 24/7 constant repetition of the same things: the demonization of Putin, the demonization of Russia. I have friends and family who will say to me, "Well, you're just spewing Russian propaganda. You're a Putin bot. You're a Kremlin asset." And they say to me, "But we have the facts." And when I say to them, "Where did you get your facts?" Well, the only place they get their facts, most of the people in the United States, is from the mainstream media, from the corporations, from the White House, you know, from the State Department. It's all coming from the same place. It's overwhelming. I was just in a video conference here yesterday with a group from Moscow that I'm a part of. It's called Friends of Crimea. And I formed a Friends of Crimea USA group with about 25 people. And they got a new booklet that they put out, 25 questions about Crimea, answering all the questions from, was it annexed, did Putin invade, and everything else. And I said, and I waited patiently, but I said, you know, I have to intervene. This little booklet, which is written, you can't publish enough copies of that to get it in the hands of enough people that will make a difference. And what we've done is lost the information war. We have got to focus on alternative media, social media platforms. We have to have people realizing they can get into this info war with a smartphone. And, you know, most of the people just courteously listen, but one of the people who's pretty high up there in this organization in Moscow, he said, I agree with you. We have to have a serious discussion about what else we can do. You know, it costs me nothing to do what I do. I don't make any money. I don't have Patreon or anything like that. I do it because I feel it has to be done. And I do it because it's so easy. I don't have a production studio. I'm sitting in a balcony and I have my computer, my microphone, my headphones. And I try to help people understand that we all have to get into this info war. And they can go beyond a sign standing on a corner. They can go beyond an op-ed. They can go beyond, you know, writing to Washington. It doesn't do any good. But these are all things that are important. But at the same time, they could be live streaming something on their smartphone. And I try to impress upon people how important I think that is. And also, you know, I take my hat off to what you gentlemen are doing. It's just another one of those very powerful weapons that gets out to people and helps them break through the fog of war.
And Parrot TV is always willing to give voice to alternative viewpoints. We're going to take a brief break at the Foreign Policy Review, and we'll be right back after this word from our wonderful printing company. Foreign Policy Review. Are you curious about financial literacy? Then take a look at Professor Anthony Ravecchio's new program on Parrot TV. It's called Financial Focus University. This is an excellent program to learn about questions related to your own finances post-COVID. It's how you can manage your money, how you can work with your tax situation. And this is an excellent and informative discussion of financial literacy. With Professor Anthony Rivecchio, your financial problems will be solved at Parrot TV with Financial Focus University. World Inkers Monthly Magazine is a fine source for your literary interests. It's an all-source magazine with poetry, prose, and essays and articles, as well as interviews. It's all full-color art and photography from a variety of voices and artists. You will find this magazine entertaining. This is an all-purpose readership, and we are looking for new voices. This sleek, full-color edition of World Inkers Monthly Magazine will be something pleasant for your eyes as well as for your mind. And we're looking for authors for one book promotion in the magazine. If you're a business, we want to promote your business. You may submit your book reviews, your academic or non-academic articles on the humanities and the arts, as well as your literary writing and creative output to publication.worldinkers@gmail.com. World Inkers Monthly Magazine does not spare any ink. Keep inking for World Inkers Monthly Magazine. Welcome back to Foreign Policy Review. Today we have Billy Bob, CARLO, PARCELLI, my co-host, and REGIS, TREMBLAY, and the Crimea. So I am Dustin Pickering. So we were discussing a little bit about alternative media and presenting viewpoints that are not popularized by the mainstream media. So what else is a positive solution to, enacting peace in the world and, getting some of these ideas out there? Is there other methods we can use? What do you guys have ideas on that?
I'll jump in if you don't mind. I've been involved in something called citizen diplomacy for quite a number of years now. In fact, that's why I came to Russia in the first place. I realized that the political diplomacy between our governments just was non-existent and not very useful and not helpful. And I came here with a group, the Center for Citizens Initiative, based in San Francisco. Sharon Tennyson is the woman who founded it. She's been doing this for almost 40 years, bringing Americans to Russia and housing them with Russians all over Russia, really from Siberia all the way to the Far East. And the whole idea behind this is when people get together, they recognize each other as one family, as brothers and sisters on this one planet we have to live on. And they find that there is no conflict. I've never found any conflict with any Russians I've ever met anywhere. They are so welcoming. And the whole hope behind citizen diplomacy is to create enough people who understand the importance of peace. They understand the importance of speaking with one another, learning how to listen to one another, to find out that we have so much more in common than we have that separates us. So citizen diplomacy is very important. This is not unique. There's quite a number of groups in the United States. I should say quite a number. There are a number of groups in the United States and around the world who are now trying to organize these citizen diplomacy visits, especially now between the United States and the West and Russia. They do work.
Anecdotally, I've only been in Moscow once, and that was for a couple of weeks. But I have to say, the friendliness and the openness, people. It was in the late '80s, and that was a time when people, there seemed to be a hope that it would all come together somehow. At least I could sense it in people's minds there, and it was probably among the most memorable 2 weeks I've ever spent in my life. I'll just say that.
Yeah, now I've been coming here since 2016, and I've lived here for 2 years, and I've traveled to Russia and around Russia since that time. And I have to just endorse what you've just said, Carlos. The people here are very warm and friendly. And this is what they tell me to a person. We love America. We love Americans. We love your music. We love your literature. We love your movies. But we're afraid of your government. They make that distinction. They don't paint us all with the same brush, as I'm afraid what is happening in the United States now, that Putin is a reflection of Russia. And by that extension, they paint all Russians with the same brush. It's so awful. It's so evil and so untrue. The Russians want to be friends. You know, I can get really animated when I talk about this, but Vladimir Putin, as soon as he became president in the year 2000, asked to become a member of Europe and NATO. And he asked several times. And guess what? He's been rebuffed. He's been ignored. And on the other hand, what he's been intimidated. He's been demonized, and his country, and he's looking for the good of the Russian people and his country. He's a patriotic Russian, and there's no doubt in my mind about that. Russia's his number one priority, and he's been so demonized for that. Has Russia invaded any other country? Oh, sure, they talk about Georgia, and they put down the rebellion there, South Ossetia. But Russia has not invaded 500 countries like the United States has since 1798. Russia's not bombing and killing anybody in the world anywhere. They went to Syria at the invitation of Assad to help them clean out ISIS. And so the way Russia is being portrayed as this evil empire, as Ronald Reagan said, the Red Menace, as communist. My own kids still telling me they think that Russia is communist, and I've become a communist.
Yeah, well, that brings us to Scott Ritter's accurate portrayal of the idiocy of the American public. Of course, there was Afghanistan, but I hear people that go on about women's rights in Afghanistan. Oh, women's rights, women's rights. Well, then why the hell did the CIA help the Mujahideen kill Najibullah? Here was a guy that was perfectly open to women's rights, completely open to women's rights, and they killed him. So, and that's the level of American sophistication about history is pathetic. It's sad. I mean, I just ran into a woman last week. We were discussing things, and when I pointed out that 27 million Russians had died in the Great, well, I didn't use Great Patriotic War because I know that would be above her head. World War II, she looked at me like, oh, where did you get this delirium? Oh, you're so crazy. You're so, she didn't even know the 27 million Russians had died in the Second World War. It's sad and disgusting. But this kind of population is so easily manipulable. So, and it is. These people are stupid people. Stupid.
You know, anything to add? He hasn't spoken in a while, so I just wanted to throw the ball his direction.
I'm just nodding in agreement. No dissenting opinions here. I mean, yeah, you could just go on and on about the propaganda apparatus and what a disservice it does to people and how it messes their minds all up. And how do you fix it? It's going to take generations before you can undo what the media has done. The propaganda apparatus. I don't know. You guys are. I'm totally in agreement. There's so many other things we could discuss related to all this. I don't even know where to take the conversation. But it's great. Like I wish folks like Regis were platformed on the mainstream media. Why won't they give a perspective? Why won't they give a platform to a sensible, sane perspective? It's just crazy that and then we tell people think that we have freedom of press here, freedom of speech. It's ridiculous.
Billy Bob, the three films that I mentioned at the beginning, The Ghost of Jeju was my first. I submitted it to 21 film festivals. It was rejected by 20. The one film festival was the Peace on Earth Film Festival in Chicago. They gave it a major award. 30 Seconds to Midnight was the next one. and that was rejected. And then I stopped because it gets really expensive to have to pay to have your application processed. But I have to tell you, these films have been seen tens of thousands of times on YouTube. I've traveled the country, I don't know how many times now, from east to west, screening these films to Quakers, to church groups, to peace groups, to anti-nuclear groups. I mean, all over the country. And I don't know how many thousands of DVDs I've provided to people. It's really interesting. They do not want this voice to be heard. And that's one way that they do it, by ignoring it. They would not accept these films in a film festival, and yet they have received awards and been acclaimed around the world. The Ghost of Jeju has been translated into 7 languages, all by volunteers. Wow. I didn't have money to pay for this. 7 languages, including Russian. I mean, that tells you somebody's listening, and that's really kind of heartwarming.
It's hard to tell by the title of what that could possibly be about. Like, so I'm curious what that specific film was about. Ghost of Jeju. Briefly,
we look like we're up against the clock. Okay. I went to Jeju is a small island 60 miles off the southern coast of Korea. The United States, under its auspices in 1946, before the Korean conflict, orchestrated the massacre of 40 to 50,000 civilians who were protesting the United States government in Korea. I discovered that and was really the first one to break that story. And it's not a pleasant story for anybody in the United States to think we're spreading freedom and democracy around the world.
Thank you. Thank you. Yeah.
Absolutely. So we have a little bit of time. We got about 8 minutes left. So if anybody
can I mention one more thing?
Yeah,
sure, go ahead.
Absolutely.
I mean, it's all about Russia and Ukraine and the United States. These sanctions, these last sanctions that the United States has imposed on Russia, have backfired tremendously on the United States. I'm telling you this now. I'm on record. It's going to hurt the United States citizens, middle class, lower middle class, and even people that are somewhat wealthy. It's going to hurt them more than it's going to hurt the Russians, because the Russians have prepared for this. They've dealt with sanctions here in Crimea since 2014. China, India, Pakistan, Venezuela, many other countries now are assisting Russia with the importation of grain that would have gone to Europe, with the importation of gas that would have gone to Europe and the United States. We in Russia are going to feel the pain, but we will survive this. And I am afraid to say, for my family, my grandchildren, and my friends, they don't know what pain is yet. And the closest that I think the United States has ever experienced this, and most of them are all dead, my parents, was the Great Depression. And I think that's coming to the United States pretty soon.
Considering a lot of the economic policies we've pursued in the last, 20 or 30 years too, it's like, just everything is, we're definitely seeing a decay of the empire and a falling of the empire as we speak. And it's our power mongering bureaucrats and whatnot in Washington and their antics have, they've compromised the integrity of this country. It's unfortunate. I feel very much grief, because, we can say, like you said, Regis, about the Russians, they love Americans, they love the people, they love the culture, but they hate the government. And I feel the same exact way. It's like, our government is it's just wicked to the core.
I've stopped calling it my government. I don't call it my government. It's the country where I was born, my birthplace. I love what I grew up in. I love what I thought it stood for and what it still could stand for. And the people in the United States are really amazing. What is so sad is, as Billy Bob pointed out, is they've been just propagandized constantly. And you almost have to think it's not their fault. They've absorbed this from the media. They've absorbed it in school. They got it from church. They got it from civic organizations. It's been all pervasive. And so I tend to give them a pass, a little bit of a pass, for having to swallow the Kool-Aid, not realizing it was bad for them.
I don't give them a pass. I think that the notion of capital has played a great role in the fact that they don't make the effort to know anything, and they feel entitled to ridicule somebody who has made the effort, like myself, I feel, and without any knowledge on their part. I can't tell you how many discussions I've had with people where they call me ad hominem after I wrote 3,000 word rebuttal with every detail in the book. Or they'll ask me sources when I provided hundreds of sources, dozens of sources. No, these people are willfully ignorant because they've been fat too long. And if it goes lean, they're not going to be prepared for it. They're going to eat each other alive. They're fools. I disagree entirely with that. They're fools.
So, Carl, what do you think distinguishes the American people from some of the citizens in the rest of the world that have different perspectives?
Well, they're stupid. They're more stupid than anybody else. I live in a primary. I live in Prince George's County. It's primarily an African American county. It's actually the richest African American county in the country. It's 39th. But I'm surrounded by African Americans. So these people have to be wiser than average Americans to survive. So you can hear some wisdom from them. But you go out to Montgomery County that way, or you go over to Langley, where the CIA is, to McLean and all those people, they don't have that. They're privileged. They can say anything they want, and no matter how ignorant it is, and they can lie even if they know better. They'll lie to your face and continue to lie. They're not on the real wavelength. They're on some personal solipsistic a boat trip to nirvana that they think is reality, and it's going to be a bitter lesson if they ever have to operate in the world like the rest of the world has to operate. A bitter lesson, and I can't wait to see it. I hope I'm still alive to see it.
They always tend to find a way to make sure it's the working class, though, that sacrifices and suffers from policy failures.
Fuck the working class. I gotta say, look at my uncles. They're all in construction in Cleveland, Ohio. Those people, my 6 uncles fought in World War II, and to a man, well, maybe a couple of exceptions, they came to the conclusion that the Nazis were right because black people were getting a little bit up the ladder, So fuck them, I'm working class. Fuck
definitely,
the
racism
class.
is definitely unacceptable. But I
think
all the working class feels that way.
Just as ignorant as anybody else, and willfully so. And they're they have the same sense of entitlement, even though they wouldn't know their ass from a hole in the ground.
Well,
I
will leave on a positive note. I've had the good fortune to travel extensively around the world, down into Asia and all the way to the Marshall Islands, across Europe and Russia. And I have to tell you that the people that I have met everywhere were all the same. They want the same things. They want to be safe. They want to be secure. They want to love their families, and they want a good future for their children. John F. Kennedy said something like this in his famous address, and why he and Nikita Khrushchev realized they were real statesmen, that we all breathe the same air and we all have the same interest. And I do hope that this is the attitude that will prevail and will get us through what I hope is a transition. So, Regis, in conclusion, would you like to tell us where we can find your documentaries or any information about you? Website? Yeah, very simple. You can go to YouTube and search for me on YouTube, TREMREGI, TREMREGI. There's over 500 films and videos and over 200 podcasts now that I've done. So TREMREGI. And if I'm deplatformed from YouTube, they can find me on BitChute, Rumble, Odyssey, and VK as TREMREGI.
Well, thank you guys for joining us today, Billy Bob, Carlo, and Regis Tremblay. It's a wonderful program. If you missed it, guys out there watching right now, go back and watch it from the beginning. It was an excellent discussion of the Ukraine and Russian crisis going on and an alternative perspective. So be tuned in for World Inkers Network around 2 p.m. Central Standard Time, and we'll definitely have a great program for you there. So thank you very much for your comments, everybody who's been watching the show today, and have an excellent day. Get out there and do some reading and some research. Excellent. Foreign Policy Review. Do you know that there is a publishing company that wants to make life easier for you as a writer? This publishing company is called World Inkers Printing and Publishing. We publish in all different languages, and we're looking for writers of all genres, all formats. We're looking for scholars, ghostwriters, playwrights, poets, short fiction, novelists, you name it. We're looking for anybody who is interested in writing and the craft of writing to be in touch with us. You can reach us at info.worldinkers@gmail.com. With World Inkers Printing and Publishing, you do not require a lot of money to publish with us. Contact us today at info.worldinkers@gmail.com. Become a winner with other authors at World Inkers Printing and Publishing. Give us a shot. We will surely finish you.